All right, folks. This is the part of the class where if it was a face-to-face class, I would be doing a little bit of board work. So I figured we'd talk about the minimum wage, which is slides 28 and 29 in lecture 4, by using the board. So what I'm going to do is draw a market graph for some area. Let's say we're talking about the labor market. So how are we going to label the axes? This is going to be the quantity of workers. I should be a little bit neater in how I draw this. So we've got quantity of workers on the x-axis, and then we've got the price that we have to pay to hire workers. So that's called the wage. So the wage would be on the y-axis. And then we've got a demand curve, downward sloping demand curve for workers. Who are demanding workers? Firms, companies, and employers. So they're demanding workers, and then we've got an upward sloping supply curve for workers. Who's supplying these workers? Well, these are the workers themselves are supplying labor. So imagine that in an area, I'm referring to slide 28 on lecture 4, imagine that in an area we've got an equilibrium wage for unskilled workers. These are the type of people who might be making minimum wage of $12 an hour. So if the market, if people are willing to pay $12 an hour, they shouldn't have any problem finding a worker. If, on the other hand, they paid something less than $12 an hour, then maybe they might have a hard time filling that position. All right, let's imagine that we also have a minimum wage that exists in this market, and let's say that it's $9.50 an hour. Okay, so what is a minimum wage? A minimum wage is a price floor. In other words, by law, employers cannot pay their workers less than whatever the minimum wage happens to be. So how would a minimum wage of $9.50 an hour affect the labor market if the equilibrium wage is $12 an hour? So it looks like it's not going to have any effect. Why is that? Because if you pay $9.50 an hour, there's a very good chance that you're not going to be attracting workers. Workers probably know that they can get a higher wage somewhere else, right? So this type of price floor is called a non-binding price floor. Why am I bringing this up? In a lot of parts of the country, there's a big push to raise the minimum wage. And a lot of the people who advocate raising the minimum wage say, you crazy whacked out economists, I don't care how much you studied economics, you don't know what you're talking about. In the past, we've raised the minimum wage and it hasn't led to unemployment. You keep saying that it's going to lead to unemployment and it hasn't in the past. They may be right though. Why is that? Because if we raise the minimum wage, this price floor, let's say from $9.50 an hour to $11 an hour, what have we essentially done? We've gone from one non-binding price floor to another non-binding price floor. In other words, because these price floors are below the minimum wage, we wouldn't expect an increase in unemployment. Maybe what happens is if employers are forced to pay a higher minimum wage, they would see that there's less of a shortage. They're having less of a hard time finding workers. But if we keep on raising the minimum wage, there's a big push to go to like $15 an hour in many parts of the country. Let's say the minimum wage went up to $13. Well, now we would be going from a non-binding price floor to a binding price floor. And this would lead to unemployment. So a lot of people say, well, how's that going to lead to unemployment? Well, firms who are demanding workers are going to look for ways of using fewer workers. They'll cut back on hours, they might replace workers with machines if they can. I don't know how many of you shop at like Target, but they now one of the things you see is self-serve checkout. Why are they doing that? Because they can get more people in and out of the stores without having to hire additional checkers, because people just check themselves out. Or back when I was in high school, one of the jobs I had was I filled up people's tanks with gas. When people pulled into a gas station, they were all full service back in the 70s, or almost all of them. And when you pulled into a gas station, somebody ran out and pumped your gas for you. Do you see that anymore? Not really. Why is that? Because it's gone self-service. So employers will look for ways of reducing the amount of labor they need, either the amount of hours or the amount of workers. And then at the same time, more people will come into the labor force. So why will they come into the labor force? Because maybe they're an unskilled worker that doesn't feel like a $12 an hour wage is an appropriate wage for their skills and talents, but maybe 13 is attractive. So just as an example, I realize all of you are dedicated students, and a lot of you have jobs, but maybe you know somebody from perhaps your high school days, maybe not that long ago, and that person doesn't have a job, and maybe that person's routine is something like this. Wake up in the morning, first thing they do, pack a bong, do a couple bong hits. Then the next thing they do is they grab the Game Boy, they start playing video games all day. Interested in getting a job? Nah, not for $12. Actually, I had a student one time at Cuyamaca when I made this presentation. She said, "You're talking about my boyfriend." So there you go. I mean, we probably know somebody who isn't working at a $12 an hour wage that might be enticed to come into the labor market at 13. Or if you don't like that example, how about this? You've got grandpa. Grandpa is retired. Grandpa's driving grandma crazy. Grandma says, "Why don't you go out and get a job?" And he's like, "I'm not going to get a job at $12 an hour. I worked all my life." But maybe now, if the wage went up to 13, or maybe if it went up to 14, boy, that greeter job at Walmart is looking better and better and better. So what's going to happen as this minimum wage rises as a binding wage? Employers are going to continue looking for ways of reducing the amount of workers that they use. More people, more unskilled workers will come into the labor market, and we would expect unemployment to rise. This is why, remember that study by Curl and Vaughan I alluded to, I think it was in lecture 1 or lecture 2. This is why 93% of academic economists believe that increasing the minimum wage ultimately leads to more unemployment among unskilled workers. All right? The next lecture, or the next video presentation I'll do is on rent control, which is another price control.